Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a viewpoint that really pushes back on some common ideas about immigration. It's a Black conservative take coming straight from the YouTube channel, A Righteous Perspective. We're going to break down their arguments point by point. Let's jump right in.
Right off the bat, the source material hits you with this powerful claim. It immediately frames the whole conversation around undocumented immigration as a major threat to the financial and social well-being of working-class Americans.
So the first big idea here is all about challenging the stories we're often told. The core argument is that the way most people talk about immigration and activism just doesn't match up with the real-life experience of some folks in the Black American community.
Now, at the very heart of this viewpoint is a case built on some really specific economic and social impacts. These are the issues that the source claims are hitting low-income Black Americans the hardest. It all starts with jobs. The argument being made is that crucial blue-collar work, things like trucking, home improvement, warehousing, these are absolute lifelines for citizens who really need a second chance, especially people who might have a criminal record. But, the source claims, these are the exact jobs now being filled by undocumented migrants who are often willing to work for less.
From there, the argument makes a sharp turn into housing, and it uses New York City as a really potent case study. Now, the speaker identifies as a real estate agent, and they use a few key numbers to draw a straight line between the number of incoming migrants and the city's homelessness problem. Let's actually walk through the math they present.
Okay, so first they set a baseline. The city has about 100,000 people who are homeless. Then they put that number up against the estimated 600,000 undocumented migrants who've arrived recently.
And here is the conclusion they draw from that. Based on their estimate that about 20% of those migrants are living in apartments, the source argues that this adds up to 120,000 units, which in their view is more than enough to house every single homeless person in the city.
The social side of the case wraps up with a demographic argument that's centered on abortion. The source points out what they see as a really stark contrast. Black Americans make up 13% of the U.S. population, but account for 40% of abortions. The argument being put forward is that this rate is actually holding the community back from growing its share of the population. All right, so shifting gears from the economic and social points, the focus moves to law enforcement. This next section offers up a really strong defense of ICE, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and it pushes back directly against their critics.
The speaker doesn't shy away from this at all. They tackle a common criticism head-on by asking this very question, and then they try to debunk it.
And to counter that narrative, the source doesn't just make claims. They bring out a series of very specific examples. The goal is to show that ICE's actions are driven by what someone did, their criminal record, not by their race. For example, they bring up the case of a British national, who the speaker describes as white as snow. He was found in Arkansas, convicted for drug trafficking, and then he was deported. And it doesn't stop there. Another example they cite is a French citizen who was deported for a whole list of crimes, including identity theft, fraud, and abuse. So the point being made with all these examples, from the UK, from France, from Canada, is that deportation is based on crime. It's not about where you're from or what your race is, and it isn't, they argue, just focused on certain ethnic groups. This whole defense of law enforcement, well, it acts as a perfect launch pad for the next argument, which is a really sharp critique of people who protest agencies like ICE and the police. Right here, the speaker starts to question the priorities of activists. They draw this really clear contrast between, on the one hand, all the energy you see in protests against law enforcement, and on the other hand, what they see as a lack of action against local crime, specifically calling out drug dealers and gangs like MS-13, the Crips, and the Bloods. And then the challenge gets even more personal. It's aimed directly at protesters who have immigrated from other countries. The source asks this really pointed question. Why wasn't all this activist energy used to fight the problems back in your own home country? And finally, this is where all these different threads, the economic competition, the defense of law enforcement, the critique of activism, this is where they all get woven together into one final warning about where the speaker thinks this is all heading politically. And the language used to describe their opponents is, well, it's incredibly strong. The source calls people who protest law enforcement and support undocumented immigration everything from treasonous individuals to the New Age Communist Party.
In this worldview, today's activism isn't random. It's seen as part of a very deliberate, three-step political process. It starts with calls for socialism, then moves to disarming the public by getting rid of the Second Amendment, And from there, communism is framed as being just right around the corner. So what's the big takeaway here? It's that from this perspective, this isn't just a simple policy disagreement. The stakes are seen as way, way higher. It's framed as a fundamental fight for the country's economic structure, its social priorities, and its entire political future.
And that leaves us with a pretty tough question that really comes out of all this. When different communities feel like their voices aren't being heard, and their survival is framed as a threat to another's, who's actually responsible for trying to bridge that divide? Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.